right, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about standards, and hopefully some things you'll take out of this will be, there's kind of a maturity curve. Maybe you don't have them at all, maybe you don't have them documented, maybe there's some areas of opportunity that that you can improve them and improve the quality of your work and get more out of the Qlik platform. So reviews are good, standards are better. I'll explain that a little bit as we're going, but this is a little bit insight into how we think of Qlik at Axis and what we think about when we're looking at applications and working with customers and things like that. Just a very quick background. I've been the Peers Consulting, that's been 100% at Axis. I live in Orlando. I'm up here visiting the Sandy Springs office, and so I have various responsibilities at Axis. One thing I would add to this, actually not specific to Axis, but the day I met Shilpan for lunch most recently, I actually started the Qlik user group in Orlando, kind of like inspired by him having started the dev group here. So we haven't met yet as of right now, it's just a LinkedIn group, but hopefully we'll get enough momentum to actually start meeting sometime soon too. Mike Terrell is in the group, so hopefully that'll be enough to generate some enthusiasm. So more specific things that we can talk about today. One, just convince you guys why standards matter, why it's worth having this conversation. Secondly, I'll be talking about what we consider our minimum viable application standards on Qlik projects. The third one's kind of just a bonus because it's a frequently requested thing, app performance tuning. And then lastly, basically what I look for when I'm reviewing applications, reviewing designs for implementations and things like that. Right. So why do coding standards matter? How many of you here in the room have coding standards? Okay. Well, I know the people from Axis do. Yeah. And then for among the people who raise their hands, you can skip the Axis people. How many of you actually have those documented? Like the documentation exists, developers can access it, things like that. So that, that in itself, if that's a takeaway from this, I think that I'll feel good about the time that we all invested in this, in the collaboration. So jumping into it now, why should we have coding standards? In short, you can write code that accomplishes the thing that you want it to do, and you can write that a number of ways. But one thing that's really important to keep in mind is that you need to write it in a way that other people are going to be able to understand it. You're not going to be the only person to ever interact with that. There's kind of a higher level of responsibility beyond just making something work, making it work in a way that other people are going to be able to update it if they need to, troubleshoot if there are problems. It needs to be not just computer understandable, but human understandable. I don't know whether I assume this presentation will be available somewhere, maybe the Qlik dev site. There are some URLs in here that I'm not going to click, but there's a kind of a satirical thing, how to write unmaintainable code, which would be like the complete opposite of this. That's pretty funny to check out. So some of the benefits of coding standards. You can shorten the time to value for each effort. You can basically speed things up. For new developers, you can hand them something that orients them with your environment and your way of doing things right off the bat. And then it will actually persist as a reference if they have questions later. It's not just something that lives in a few people's heads at your company. It can actually be education for people at your company who are new to the product. And I know big companies have a lot of platforms. These same things would apply to almost anything. So it can be education if you document best practices and things like that. Less variability between people. So a lot of consultants have their own ways of doing, developers have their own ways of doing things. And this helps kind of cut down on that a little bit and make it easier to prevent making a mess. So like I said, constant reference for deployment. And then this is something that's really important, and kind of referring back to the title of the presentation. If you set your expectations up front, you're saving yourself trouble on the back end when you're reviewing code and saying we can't deploy this yet, we need to go back and change X, Y, and Z before we can put it in production. If everybody already knows what X, Y, and Z are supposed to be at the outset, you're saving yourself that work on the back end and getting everybody on the same page up front. So what's the alternative of having standards if you have no standards? I'm not going to pick on anybody who didn't raise their hands, but what are some of the downsides, or what are some of the things that can happen? I've worked with a lot of different companies over the years, and this is all definitely, I've seen everything. I've seen practically total environments, but the thing that we colloquially refer to as the Wild West deployment, you tend to have things like redundant data extracted. Each developer really could be reinventing the wheel. People could be working on the same thing as each other, not knowing it. People have their own ways of doing things, and it just makes it such a mess to make any kind of changes after the fact. It's doing the impact analysis for even something fairly minor is incredibly time consuming. Different results for undocumented reasons. That kind of goes, you might think of this as all as like programming standards or like writing code standards, but part of it also just has to do with the design of the application itself and what are some things you've got to check off and make sure you're including such that end users can understand things. Maybe most importantly, if you don't have standards, you may end up having to enlist consultants to help clean up your environment. So these are just some possibilities. If you haven't created any at all, I'm just kind of planting the seed here. Maybe you already have some, and these are some things you could think about that could be included that aren't there now. So general overview, deployment documentation. Who are the people who are involved? What are the URLs for everything? What are the server names and things like that? That's pretty basic stuff, but everybody needs to know to get running. Deployment files might be things that, like template applications or centralized code, like Rob Wonderlic has the Qlik cookbook. Qlik has the QDF. There are a lot of ways that you can kind of shortcut these things. And actually, like with template applications, for instance, you can build in a lot of standards and best practices where you don't have to do any work whatsoever. All you have to do is start from this file, and you're 50% of the way there. Themes are kind of those, I don't see them used as much as I think maybe they should be. That's kind of the new ClickSense thing. If you guys haven't played around with themes, you can generate them for free online. The nice thing about them is that they're essentially centralized. It's like an extension. If you want to update this theme, you just re-import that, update that on the server, and that'll automatically roll through to all the applications. And then as far as the developer documentation, naming standards are really important. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Code formatting, using variables, and then also checklists can be useful sometimes as well, especially if somebody's doing something for the first time. So what are some of our standards just based on our experience at Access Group? When I'm talking about the standards, this is the minimum standards. It should be attributes of everything you build unless it's just for yourself. They should call back to documented standards, otherwise I don't know how you can realistically expect them to get followed. And as I mentioned before, you can kind of bake them into template applications and stuff and give people a head start. So hopefully over time they'll become habitual and you don't have to think about them so much. So there may be exceptions to this sometimes on purpose. I'm not going to read all of this, don't worry. Excuse me. So from a scripting perspective, you can think of this like the back end. Change logs are incredibly important. If you don't have some version control tool with this, it's amazing how infrequently I see people having change logs in their applications. I don't know how you would even know whether you have the latest version if you don't have a change log. So just having a readable script organized into different tabs. Comments go an incredibly long way. I think that goes without saying. Tables and field names following naming standards. Hard coding is a bad thing. If you ever see hard coded values, I gotta remember to update that app next year because I got a hard coded number in there for a field name or something. And there's coding style. I tend not to get too hung up on coding style as long as it is actually readable. That's the most important thing, is that you can actually read it and understand it. Whether you use spaces versus tabs is not a major concern to me. This is just a screenshot of some script. This is how I like to comment. I'm multi-step processes where I have like an outline at the top, and then I call back to that as you go down through the code. It makes it easy to get in like a sense in one place of all the stuff that's going to happen on that sheet, and then you can dig into it as you go down farther. So that's just an example of some Qlik code. For the data model, first we'll probably go without saying, QBD generator should have all the data dropped from them. No loops or synthetic tables or keys, no snowflake tables. I'll show a screenshot of that in a second if you don't know what that is. No unused fields. I'll come back to that in a second. It's a little bit more, I'm a little less stringent on that when you have self-service and people are potentially wanting to use fields that you happen to not include in the front end in any of your visualizations, but they may need to answer their questions. And there's a little bit of data quality checking that I would recommend doing. We have some utilities that will like binary load a data model and check for integrity and things like that. A lot of this you can actually get from the document analyzer too. So that might be part of just a developer checking his or her own work for the person who's doing the review. As far as snowflaking, I just wanted to throw a picture up here. If you guys aren't familiar with that term, most people know what a star schema looks like. There's you have your fact table in the middle, surrounded by dimensions. Snowflakes tend to have attributes associated with the dimensions. This may or may not be a snowflake schema in the traditional data warehousing sense, but what I did want to demonstrate here is the number of hops. Generally, I think about minimizing the number of hops to get from one end of the data model to the other. So if you select something down here and you have a list box or something up there, both visible on the screen at the same time, there are a lot of hops that have to take place to get from one side to the other. So that's something that I would look at from a data modeling perspective for the performance review. It's also a little bit hard to wrap your brain around data models like that, and that's definitely not the worst one I've seen before. Interface standards, so no calculated dimensions, that's a performance thing, not a usability thing, but I'll come back to that just like the unused fields. Like I said, I don't want to necessarily read all of these. This one's really important, especially for some of the things that Dalton and Joe are demoing before. The master library, you might think your job is done when you've built out the interface and you've created all the objects that you know you need to create in the front end. But if users are going to be self-serving on that and they don't have the ability to just browse every single field that exists in the data model, you have to make sure you have populated your master library to enable them to actually use those in their self-service visualizations. Fields are not being labeled in the UI. That can be really annoying and create a lot of extra trouble and dissonance between things that are actually the same, being called different things in different places, or having a different name in the chart compared to the selections bar. This sufficient context is a really important one as well. That's really more like a design skill, but when you're looking at the front end, this can be helpful to get somebody else's perspective on this. What questions do you have immediately? If you're showing year-to-date, quarter-to-date, month-to-date compared to last year, as of what date are we talking about here? If that hasn't been labeled, then that's a very logical question that you can pretty much foresee that your users are going to have. Also, same thing if you're excluding data systematically. Like we don't have, we have this subset of data is just filtered out of the whole application. An about tab is a great place to put that kind of information. So information about the release, the purpose of the application, the support email if you have questions. So these are all things that we look for in applications. We have template applications that have some of these things built into it, like the about tab, for instance, but others are kind of like, you can unit test or maybe you have review processes. Just a couple of examples. I'm actually not going to read through these in great detail, but the thing that, two things that I want to emphasize about this, everything should be consistent and unambiguous, whatever standards you come up with. The most important thing is that you have a standard, not that you follow exactly what I do. The other thing that I think is great to keep in mind if you're trying to document your standards or you're trying to come up with them in the first place is that as much as possible, we like to make the naming conventions be self-documenting, such that when you look at something, you already know what it is just by virtue of the name. You don't have to open it. You don't have to trace back in the code to figure out, oh, this concatenated key is concatenation of customer ID and date and region. You don't have to look that up because our naming convention for concatenated keys includes the names of all the fields that are concatenated together in the order in which they are concatenated, so you already know exactly what that is just by looking at it. So always look for opportunities to make something self-documenting and save people the trouble downstream of having to go back and figure out what those are. I'm including this in just as kind of like a little bonus. So it's just a common thing that we help customers with, and that I think people can benefit hugely from if they could learn a little bit about this. And this is not hard, honestly. Like that's what I want. That's really like the main takeaway of this section. It doesn't have to be that difficult. There are only a few things that will give you like 80% of the benefit for 20% of the value. So generally speaking, step one is to reduce the app size, and then step two is to improve the efficiency of what's left. If you're familiar with the data ratio from Edward Tufte, it follows the exact same principle. I think about this too for like problem solving too. It's like, can we shrink the problem before we really dig into it? In the data ratio, it's remove the non-data ink and then emphasize the data ink. So the two things I would suggest doing for reducing the app size are dropping the unused fields, and I'll explain better how you can do this stuff in a fairly automated way in a second, and then to drop the extraneous rows from non-fact tables. So by that I mean you have a sales table with the last 2 years of sales in it. It's associated to a customer dimension that has all the customers you've ever sold to since the beginning of time in it, and you just don't need to carry that data. It's additional overhead in your application. It's really easy to get rid of it. As far as improving the app efficiency, I think the number one lowest hanging, easiest to fix, and biggest impact thing is eliminating non-essential calculated dimensions. I'll come back to that in a second because you guys might be creating them inadvertently. It's actually really, really easy to do by accident in ClickSense. Maybe you guys can like influence them fixing this. I'll explain that. But and then lastly, once you've done that, what are the remaining slowest few sheet objects? And just dig into those few. Look at the expressions that are being used in those. I'll go into these in more detail, but those four things are pretty much like, that's the 80-20. So how many of you are familiar with the ClickSense document analyzer? Yeah. Does it ring a bell for everyone? See the hat? So it's something that Rob created the ClickView document analyzer a while ago, and then also the ClickSense one. And we've been collaborating with him on the most recent few versions of it to add some more features to it to basically try to generate more insights for you automatically. So all the screenshots here are from the ClickSense document analyzer. We're also going to be presenting, Rob and I, at Connections on the same topic. These slides I kind of borrowed from that presentation, so it's a little secret preview. So dropping unused fields. This is a very quick, easy binary thing. It's literally flagged in the document analyzer. That's the easiest way to find it. You can, yeah, that's the easiest way to find it. So that's pretty much it. Drop unused fields. Extraneous dimension rows. So this is the second part of the data model. So this screenshot maybe doesn't do justice to it, but basically it's looking at the subset ratio, which is maybe a little bit hard to understand metric, but something that is available if you look even just at the table viewer. Even if you don't have the document analyzer, you can look at the subset ratio and see whether your fact table subset ratio is lower than the dimension table subset ratio. What that indicates, the numerator is how many distinct values of that field are in that table, divided by how many distinct values there are of that field in the whole data model in all the tables. So hopefully your fact table has no fewer and no more customers in it than there are in the dimension. So it's a little bit confusing, but it's easy to whether you have actually tested for this or not. If you just follow this order of operations for building your data models, you don't even really have to worry about it. So build your fact tables first. That's basically your transactions, the actual business events that are happening that are Then lastly, you load all the supporting reference data for that. Well, over the time periods, the customers, the products, the patients, the providers, whatever it is, they use the exist function when you load from those tables. That'll make sure it only loads rows required to support the fact table that's already in memory.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I see one. So normally what you do is you load the dimension table and then you load the fact table. Right?
For a data warehouse, sure. In a data warehouse, yes. And I think that has to do more with managing surrogate keys.
Right. But if we do this case, then we are going to get only the dimensions which has a value to it.
Correct.
We are not going to get any dimensions. It can be a use case where, and most of the time that is a use case, they want to see everything.
Yeah.
Whether you have a value or not. In this case, we are going to get that.
The use case, so I can see, I agree with your point. I think a use case might be if you want to see customers who are not active or like products that have not sold, that might be something you want to do.
Right.
And that goes back to the whole value proposition of the green, white, gray for Qlik. If you go down that route, I would still suggest, I would still recommend putting some kind of restriction on that just so you're not creating a lot of noise because a product may not be active anymore. So maybe there's some kind of like, it's maybe it's a product that exists in the fact table or has an active flag of yes. Maybe there's some other condition you can add that would help kind of narrow that down a little bit.
And that's a great point for the whole idea of QED layers.
Right.
I mean, the QEDs, you need to load it all. We need
Yeah,
all
oh yeah. To be clear, this is talking about
you
the
say,
exercise.
and so
Yeah.
in that app, I'm analyzing sales. In that particular app, do I need unsold customers? Or do I need a different app where I look at customers who are not active? Right? And so you can pick or choose. Maybe you need all the customers in that app, but you don't need every single product. So somebody has to know building the front end. What am I pulling in? What's the purpose of the app? And so you do have to choose that.
For the best practices, I would definitely take this one. But it's not easy to fight the customer.
Oh yeah. You absolutely can't just say, well, that was the fastest way to build the app. You just can't get your answer because she's going to lie.
Right. Thank you.
So the first two I'll mention on the UI, calculated dimensions. It's very, very easy to, so some of these may be necessary. This one, using the advanced aggregation function, there's probably a way you can use the flagging expression, but getting rid of these will improve your calculation performance significantly, like really, really significantly. You can make people think you're a wizard with tuning Qlik just by running the QlikSense document analyzer and stuff. The link here on the word innocuous, I mentioned that just because even experienced developers may not be aware that they're accidentally creating calculated dimensions. Basically, anytime you open the expression editor and then hit apply, when you're editing a dimension, it adds an equal sign, and then it kind of obscures it, so you can't even tell that you created a calculated dimension. So you have to, I would recommend checking your own work, like I said, even if you are experienced. The last thing I just wanted to mention, there's no magic bullet on the slowest sheets or objects, but there's useful output in the document analyzer. It at least lets you know where there's the most opportunity to improve, and thus where you are best investing your time. So you can look at every single chart in the whole application, or which might take a while, or you can figure out what the 2 or 3 slowest are and look at just the expressions being used in those. So lastly, architect standards, what I look for during code reviews. How many of you all have a formal review process prior to deploying? Excellent.
Maybe long.
Right. So do you also have a formal design review process before it's actually built?
To some degree, yes.
Okay.
I would say it's as comprehensive as the deployment one, but yes.
Mm-hmm. That's really good. That's what I would really advocate. This is not as many companies are doing this. Kind of goes back to what I was saying before about rather than having people go back and fix something or change something after they've done it, you set the expectations up front that they're headed down the right path, and you're less likely to have that rework. So I'll just go through a few of these. So having an organized approach thinking about your solution and why you're taking that approach compared to alternatives. Basically, thinking about what I'm really saying here in short is before you start typing anything, think really hard about what you're actually trying to accomplish. And then you can work through what ways you might be able to get there before you actually like code yourself into a corner and realize like, oh wait a minute, that's actually not going to work. Writing it all out in detail, this is what I do at least, creating an outline of what you're going to do, and then you can go in and actually flesh it out as you're doing it. You can foresee a lot of problems this way. Like I said, you won't code yourself into a corner. It's also a good time to ask for help because you may realize you don't know how to solve that problem. Forward-looking. So let's assume that you're going to be very successful. You're going to build this awesome application. It's going to be around for many years. What is it going to look like if it's just reloading every day for 3 years? Is it going to be an unbearable data volume and people are not going to be able to use it anymore? Is it going to take so long to reload that people are getting in late? Are there hard-coded parameters that are going to need to be updated at some time in the future? And sometimes there's just weird stuff. I mean, if you have something that is showing you year to date, quarter to date, month to date, the first month of the year, all three of those are going to look the exact same. So maybe that's an accepted limitation, but just think a little bit ahead about what things are going to look like. You know, the first day of the month, and you have a line chart showing the progress of the month. It's going to be a dot. A balanced solution. So there's always more than one possible approach to solve the problem, and you can spend a lot of time on a solution that other people are not going to be able to understand or maintain. Basically, there's kind of a balance to the different ways you can accomplish something. I don't mean there's like a million ways to load a table into memory, but when it comes to solving the unique problems that more experienced developers start to run into, and you're considering the options that you could possibly take to solve this problem, look ahead to who is going to own this farther down the road, how the platform might be changing over time, really whether it's a good use of the product or we're creating a bunch of stuff to make it look like something it's not. It's basically just going to one extreme is unlikely to be ideal. It's frequent that I get I think, oh boy, if I just added this one extra step in here, I could cut this reload time down by 2 seconds. But that 2 seconds is probably not worth this chunk of code and having the comment to explain to somebody why I did this to save 2 seconds of reload time and also increasing the possibility that that's going to break sometime in the future. So repetition eliminated. This is a general design principle. I think it's not just a coding principle. It's on the front end, and I think about this all the time. When you see something that is being repeated, there's generally an opportunity to do a better job of implementing that. And as I said, not just a coding principle. If you see the word sales like 14 times on this one sheet of an application, there might be a better way to organize the design of that, to come up with some kind of grid that makes it clear, or something to delineate this section that is about sales without having to write it 100 times. Some examples, you guys are probably already doing a lot of these, but I just want to kind of increase your awareness a little bit. So included files, the use of variables in general is a good example of this. Parameterized variables, which are sometimes called custom functions, that's a more advanced thing, kind of like subroutines, but once you get comfortable with that, you can really cut down the amount of code that you're writing and save yourself a lot of development time and testing time. Pushing things upstream in the data model, that's a just generally accepted best practice. It's just an example of eliminating repetition and centralizing where something is being controlled. The master library in general is a great example of this, and I mentioned Qlik themes before. Another good example. You don't have to individually brand each application. You can have this one theme that can be updated. Sufficient context. What am I looking at? What is this doing? This can be helpful to get somebody else's perspective if you've been really buried in something, but explaining why you did what you did and what assumptions you made. Anything that's really not obvious, and it's, again, front end and back end. Commenting your code, but also designing the front end such that users can understand what they're looking at. if you have a weird looking where clause, you should probably include a comment there. This is the last one I'll mention. It's just do things properly the first time within reason. I don't mean when you're still prototyping, but a lot of times, I mean, I have a couple of examples that are, this one I think is the one that almost nobody ever does the first time, and then they go back and learn a lesson about, oh God, this is so much worse going back and having to do this. But technically, basically, technically correct is a low standard. There are a lot of ways you can arrive at a solution that is technically correct in serving up the right answers, but you don't want to have to keep revisiting something over and over and over again because you've created something that's difficult to maintain and you're trying to kind of like rein it in. So it also makes it really hard to estimate how long it will take to complete something if people are pushing you to like, you know, what percentage done is this? And then you have in the back of your mind like, oh, I have to go back and fix all these things that I just put in there for, you know, as a placeholder. And just to kind of summarize that, be mindful of the work you leave for others. And that's it. Yes. I guess I'll take questions if there are any. Spiritus?
So, let's say I'm a developer organization and we're in the Wild West scenario, and Sal's presentation was great. Now, on that, most likely, right, there'll be other developers in the Wild West that have their opinions about how these things should be done. Some of them are silly, others maybe not decisions that have to get made. Like, what's the I prefix going to be? Is it a percent or a Z or something else? Do you have any suggestions or recommendations from experience for people on how you get your developers together and really make these decisions so that you kind of build this standard that everyone buys into?
Well, so there are, the two options that come to mind immediately are top-down and bottom-up. Which one do you think is going to lead to more buy-in among the developers? Right, so you could, you could come up with something, you could leverage what we have or something like that, but I think if you're already in that situation and there's not some like external help that has been hired to like help train people on this and all this stuff, then I think discussing the issues that you've been running into and getting some, like collaborating with the developers and kind of like having them help you arrive at, okay, so what should we do now going forward in these scenarios and try to come up with that. I would say there's some merit though, like if you can borrow somebody else's or use them as examples, I would try to do that though, simply because even if you're just using to help guide that process, there are likely things that you would make sense to have standards for that you might not independently arrive at. So if you want something to be fairly comprehensive, I do think it is helpful to get some outside help, even if you collaborate with a lot of other people on what your standards are going to be. That's a good question. Ranjan? This is weird. It's kind of asking me these in the office.
learning stuff because I've sat through one of your presentations like this in a while. But you said you had 217 interactions with clients, right? Out of that percentage, obviously you've dealt with a lot of rat's nests. Out of that percentage, how many have started to adopt or changed sort of what they're doing, and what's led to that? Like, is it oh, we're not doing it well, or what's kind of been the okay, this isn't working, or
I'm trying to think of an example. It works really well when we are with the customer from the beginning of their implementation, or maybe they're a Qlik customer and it's the beginning of their Sense implementation, and there's a little bit of a reset and like, all right, let's do this better now that we have had the experience of doing it the other way. That's one situation. I'm not even answering your question about the percentage.
the one thing I usually get a screaming call from a senior executive.
Yeah, it's when things have already gone wrong.
Not working, or performance is an issue.
Yeah, exactly. It tends to be when things have gone so wrong that it's become like unbearable, and there is never really a quick fix for it once it's already kind of gone off the rails. The coding and the flexibility that are afforded by Qlik are really powerful. If it's a dual-edged sword, you know. It's really powerful if you're extremely capable with it, but you can also kind of take that in unproductive, difficult to fix kind of directions, but by the same token. And it's usually not until they've had like serious problems where they're calling an outside help that we then end up getting involved.
We've seen that too, where Dalton brought it out, we'll go on site, and it's generally after, hey, one of our developers left the organization.
Oh yeah.
Somebody else is taking over all their apps.
Yeah.
Help us figure out what's going on here.
Yeah.
And then it's help us set that process in place. If that's not an issue. We want Jack to be able to go on vacation. We don't want him to just have to hit the reload button every morning because that's what he was doing.
Yeah.
Somebody figure out that that was a bad idea.
Yeah.
So that he can actually go on vacation. If he leaves, we don't have all his code dead. So yeah, I think they actually had to feel it a little bit before they change.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times those people left the company because they're like, I don't, I hope nobody figures out what I did.
How much stuff do you publish, like, or either blog or what do we post that's besides the utilities and things out there?
There's a lot more available to our customers than the general public. I haven't actually been blogging on our website very much lately. I started my own website where my most recent posts have been since March. I mean, it doesn't take very long to get caught up on all 6 of them, but that's where I've been writing. At least like that would be the best, totally publicly available place to find things I'm writing about. Don't be surprised if you also see competing technologies in there. Don't be alarmed. Yeah. Or personal finance stuff. There's a little bit of that one there too.
Since you've been working with Rob, Men's and one of the scripting best practices is to use same cases, keywords. You know, the field name creates sensitive, keywords is not.
Sorry, I'm having a little trouble here.
So one of the best practices in scripting, and the back end and UI best practices, is to use same case for the keyword, even though they're not case
Oh, yeah.
because of the impact on the cache.
Right.
Are you guys implementing that in the sense editor?
On the
Yeah.
You mean just variation on writing the same expression in
Yeah,
different
say
ways?
sum of cells.
Yeah.
This is sum of cells in uppercase, it's going to impact.
I'm trying to remember whether there's a flag for that. I think there is, but I could be mistaken. But I think there might already be a flag for that under the expressions. We had that in our QEW auditor, which was like an access group utility that we kind of based a lot of those flags on. It was in that, and I think it's in. I'm not 100% sure. I'm almost sure though. If you're not using version 1.5, which is the most recent one, I'm like 90% sure.
Is that confirmed, like, it's still a problem?
I haven't retested. That's one thing I should point out. Like some of these best practices, I haven't retested recently. Like I don't have like an application set up to check this thing.
That's the one that needs to be retested. It's like it's talking about the app, we'll just like look at the syntax tree that gets generated and then if that's
Okay.
Who knows if it's implemented and tested?
Yeah. Well, if you're using one other thing I'd say is if you're using variables to store reused expressions, then it shouldn't be a problem anyway. Or master measures shouldn't be a problem anyway if you can just use the master measure and place you essentially don't have to write the expression once anyway. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you guys for listening.